In this lesson, we'll take a look at some basic polygon modeling tools. So we're going to pick up right where we left off with the last lesson, and what we need to do is to build out the tires and wheels for our car model here. Now we're going to do that using a polygon modeling technique. But before we get started, I want to give you an idea of kind of what it is we're shooting for. So here's just an idea of a tire and wheel assembly that I saw that I kind of liked. So this is kind of a goal, just so you have in mind what it is we're after. So when we start building these things from really basic building blocks like circles and tubes, it'll make sense the divisions that we're making and why we're making them. So with the video paused here, the first thing that we're going to create is going to be this sort of brake drum or inner wheel assembly. And then later what we'll do is we'll use a tube and we'll build out the tire assembly and sort of the inside of the wheel. And then we'll use some more advanced polygon tools to create these little spokes that exist between those two elements. So first off, we're going to start building this little inner brake drum element here. Another thing to note is that we're only going to build one of these tire and wheel assemblies, and then we'll be duplicating them into these different positions for the different sides of the car and for the front and rear. But let's start off first by building out that little brake drum. So the first thing that we want to do is to start with a simple circle shape. Now the way that we create our circle is, of course, here we want to come to the Create tab. And I'm going to scroll over. Again, remember you can use these little arrows on the right or left-hand side if you need to scroll over. But go ahead and scroll over on the Create tab till you find Circle. Now I just want to create a circle right at the origin of my scene, and remember the shortcut way to do that is to hold down Control at the same time that you click on Circle. So here we go, Control and click on the circle, and you can see there is my circle. It's a little bit big for that brake drum assembly, but we're going to go ahead and make those changes and get it down to about the right size. So to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is dive inside of this new container for the Circle Object 1 that was made here inside of my network view. So let's just double click and we'll dive inside there. And first things first, my circle is sort of facing the wrong direction. And we could use a transform node and then just rotate the circle around. But the circle itself gives us some basic orientation options that we want to take advantage of. And the first one here is this orientation. We just want to make sure that this is set to the Y and Z plane. And basically what that is referring to is the coordinate system that we use inside of Houdini in most 3D applications. So you can see this little icon here in the lower left-hand corner. And you'll see that this is the Z-axis and this is the Y-axis. And that circle that we just created fits along the Z-axis and the Y-axis. If we change that around, we can say Z and X-axis. Now you'll see that it's flat along the Z here and the X here. So it's basically just defining the two axes that are going to define how that circle lies inside of our scene. So now we've got our circle. It's facing the right direction. I'm going to just kind of move it over into position here, and we can do that by using the center property here on the circle. Now we can either, as we know, use the value ladder to slide it over. We can slide it over in Z. Now remember, I'm doing that just by middle clicking on that value. And I'll come down to the 0.01 range, and as I scroll or slide to the right and left, dragging with my middle mouse held down, I can sort of get that circle in a general position. I also have the ability to use the tools using the handles here inside of the viewport, so I can just grab here and drag and put this circle kind of where I need it to be. And I can see here that instead of being right dead in the middle of the car, let's go ahead and scoot it over a little bit so that we're going to build this front left driver's side wheel and tire assembly first. Now it might be better if we look at this in directly from the right or left side, so from a direct side view. So I'm going to go ahead and make that change. Again, I can do that here using this drop down in the top right hand part of the viewport. I'm just going to set my view to be the right side viewport. Zoom in a little bit on it. And we're just going to kind of line it up. Now I'm going to make its size a little bit smaller. And I can do that using the radius property. So to make that radius property smaller here, again, instead of doing it separately in X and Y, like having to come in here, select this and do 0.25 and then tab over in 0.25. I do want it a little bit bigger. I'm going to use the value ladder. It'll give me a little bit more control. So again, I can highlight this name radius so that it has this sort of white, lighter gray highlight. Middle click right there gives me my value ladder. And now I have the ability to really control exactly how big that guy is. So and just to get a random starting point, I guess somewhere right in there, around, what's that, 0.202. It doesn't have to be 100% exact. It's just 0.2 should work for you if you end up with something around there. And let's scoot it over a little bit. I'm going to also turn on wire shaded mode. So smooth wire shaded. Again, that's done using this icon here on the toolbar across the top of your tab. It's the third one over here. So I chose smooth wire display. This gives me a better idea just of where the inner hub of the tire is before that fender begins. And since I want my wheel and tire to be centered in that, I just want to get a pretty good center idea of where that might be. Now, the last thing that I want to do here before we let go of our circle and start really modifying it is to up the number of divisions on the circle. And that's a simple slider right here. I can just drag that up. And somewhere around 16 ought to work for us. If you want to go higher or lower, it's ultimately going to define the number of spokes that you have in your wheel. If we look back at our model here, we can see that these divisions that are around actually sort of help define the number of spokes. So the more divisions you would have, probably the smaller of a gap you will have, and the more number of spokes that you'll end up having. So for me, just about 16 I found works very well. So the circle that we've got now, we're actually wanting to use it to define this smaller section here, right here, the inside part of this wheel. And we also want that to fit inside the actual body of the vehicle. So now that I've got it sort of to the correct size, I'm just going to look at it again from the front view this time. And again, I can change that view with the drop down. So we'll set view to the front viewport. And zoom out a little bit here. Let's find our circle. So there's our circle. It's kind of a little bit hard from here to tell exactly where that's going to sit inside the hub. So let's try the perspective viewport. So we'll set view to perspective view. I'm just going to frame up on it by doing spacebar and F. And we'll scoot it so that it rests just inside of the actual car body itself. There we go. And since it is that smaller piece on the inside, I'm going to make this a tad bit smaller. And scoot it up just a little. Again, none of this here needs to be exactly scientifically accurate. It's just going to be whatever looks right for you. And we'll probably make adjustments to this position in a future lesson here as well. So that basically gets our beginning starting circle in place. In the next lesson, we'll start to look at using the poly extrude tool.